We're ready.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. First item of business is the approval of the minutes from June 6th meeting. Those were forwarded with the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval as distributed.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Corso. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business. Does anyone have any new business?
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe it's a good time to recognize the success of the national championship of the Opti class junior regatta. It was 8 days of racing were scheduled. I don't think people realize how big a deal that is. It's brought a lot of people here for a long time. I don't know how many days were actually sailed, but most of them, at least 7, I'm pretty sure. Maybe Carl knows.
I don't know. I didn't get a count.
But anyway, it was done quietly and without public money to speak of. I'm sure certainly has the support of the city and the community, but it was just a fantastic thing to see, and I'm sure most of us are aware of it, but if we're not, it was a pretty cool thing. A lot of people here, over 1,000 people for a long time.
Very good. Yes, a lot of people, a lot of boats out on the water. So it was pretty impressive watching them go out as a fleet and come back in. So
Amazing logistics. Amazing logistics. Handling
yes.
all those 320 kids.
Yeah, that's great. All right, then we'll move on. Any other new business? I'm sorry. Then we'll move on to old business, and first is the new updates and the downtown parking study. Erin.
Thanks, everyone. I understand that you were asking a few questions about the downtown parking study at the last meeting, which I was not able to attend. So I brought you a slideshow today to give you a little bit of an update of what we're up to. We're doing a staff-led parking study to help understand the patterns of parking downtown and when everything's at it, what the counts are like at the peak and at their lowest use. And we're building on a lot of previous work. So as you may know, there was a 2014 parking study. They counted 18 blocks, and I have a map of what that looked like here shortly. And they found that at the peak hour, which was during a State Theater event, about 61% of the parking spaces downtown that they counted in those 18 blocks were used. So about 40% of them remained open when at the busiest time. And on average, about 40% of the spaces downtown that they counted were used, and so 60% of them were open at any given time. Staff led a parking count from 2016 to 2017. They counted the garage and they counted the parking lot at the Jackson Street and I think the one on Wayne Street. They reported 50% peak garage utilization. That was the big finding there. So the garage was never more than 50% full. And then in the 2021 downtown plan, that's where those 2016, 2017 parking counts are reported. And there's parking commentary and recommendations in the downtown plan, and it really focuses on multimodal. So it focuses on parking as one component of downtown access, including walking, biking, golf carts, et cetera. So that's just a little bit of a context, and I could spend an hour just talking about these things, and I'm happy to follow up with questions for you all if you have them. So for 2024, 2025, staff created a parking plan from the call to action from the community and from City Commission. It has 3 large goals. One is ensuring the turnover of on-street spaces. So our on-street spaces is when you're going to get folks that are running into a store to buy something, somebody picking up a coffee or picking up a to-go order. You really want your on-street spaces to turn over and have some capacity, have some empty spaces available for those folks that are coming into City Hall to pay their water bill or you're stopping to get a coffee, like I said. So in a healthy system, 10 to 20% of on-street parking spaces are open at any given time. So the parking counts will really help us understand where we are today and how we need to move the needle to make sure that that's happening. The second big goal is to ensure that long-term parkers understand where to park. That means if you're coming in for a weekend, if you're getting on a boat and leaving your car here for an overnight, that you understand where to put your vehicle so it's not on the street, for example, and understanding our signage and wayfinding system, what resources are online, and how people are finding those long-term parking areas. And the third is to ensure those day-long parkers understand where to park. That means employees that are going to be in one space for 8 to 10 hours, or folks that are here for all day and moving around the city. That leads, those big goals lead into a series of strategies and actions that we have that we're working on, many of them simultaneously. And the big one I wanted to bring to you today is the parking counts. That has been the largest body of work that we're working on, is to study the inventory of parking. We're also studying the parking management, how the signage functions, whether we're doing any ticketing and other research on other methods. We're looking at potential special events. Is there things we could do during special events to make parking easier or expand inventory if we need to? How we communicate parking, especially if we make any changes, and the safety components of when folks are using spaces and how they access them and how that all functions. So we're doing 20 parking counts. Most of them have been completed to date. We have a few left. We are counting 3 Friday nights, 3 Saturday nights, 3 Wednesday nights, 1 party at the pier. One typical big event, which we counted July 4th in the evening, was actually very low counts. Not very many people parked downtown, but May 25th was also the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, so that counts as a big event as well. We counted 1 farmer's market, 3 lunch times, and we started early before the summer season really picked up in those because we wanted a good baseline. And then 3 mornings, we're counting a few times at 8 a.m. And then we want to count 2 state theater shows. And so those counts will probably come later when the state theaters open. And I think what I am anticipating is that we'll have a summary presentation of the other counts before we get those state theater counts. Oops. So we're counting 31 blocks. So from Fulton Street to Warren Street and Adams Street at the south. And I'll talk a little bit about the strategy of why we chose this land area to count here shortly. But I just want to get you a visual. So if you're top left, that block number 1 is all the way over at the Paper District Marina. There's a big bank of parking there. And then the top right extent is Shoreline Park. There's also a big bank of parking there. And if you go down Warren Street, that we have the new bike path connection coming up to the Sandusky Bay Pathway. There's new development, new housing over in Warren. There's also a new, on block number 20, there's the 419 Hotel with a big bank of parking there. And then if you follow Market Street all the way to the west around blocks 27, 14, and 13, there's more industry, that's where Metal Tech is, and less banks of parking. But there is the fire station at 26, and along Market Street, there's a lot of angled parking. So we wanted to make sure we were looking at those spaces as well. In comparison, the counts that they did in 2014 counted these 18 blocks. It was much more focused on the downtown core, which was really appropriate at that time. That was really encompassing the majority of the activity of downtown at that time. And downtown activity has really expanded quite a bit since then. And so that's why we wanted to make sure we were taking a look at the right amount of land area to understand how the downtown parking system is functioning. So this is a little tour of the state of parking and walking downtown, because the framework of decision-making, when you're looking at parking and making parking decisions, has more to do with just how you find a space. It's part of the strategy of the economy of downtown as well. So the philosophy about parking is that it's one piece of infrastructure. People don't come here for parking. Parking isn't the draw, it's part of the experience. So it's like trash cans, restrooms, water lines. Parking spaces are infrastructure. We need them to function, but they're not going to bring people here. We don't need to add more people. We need to add more things that people want to do and see and be part of, and make sure they have a parking space if they're driving here. So people come for the unique retail experiences, for people watching, memory making, local food and beverage. There's a lot of reasons why people come to our city, and those are the reasons why we want to keep working on those things to bring people here, and parking is an external function of that whole system. Some of the parameters we use to guide parking strategy and decision-making, especially in a downtown setting, is the general public, and this gets to the land area that we're counting for parking. In general, people, including older adults, will walk 5 minutes to their destination. It feels relatively easy and simple to walk about a quarter mile to a destination. And people will walk even further for an event, for a big draw, like a concert or a big festival, something like that. Also, foot traffic, so people walking past storefronts, is the most important factor for the success of retail stores. Foot traffic drives retail sales. And on-street parking, as we already covered, should turn over on a regular basis to make sure that those folks that are just swooping in for a few minutes have somewhere to stop, or else they won't. So that means at least 10% of parking spaces should be available at any time, so people are able to find a spot. We don't have them looping around, driving around looking for parking, that they're able to find a spot. This leads us to a picture, if we're thinking about that parking system and where we're taking photos and where we're looking at parking of that land area we're covering. So the really thin white circle on this map is a 5-minute walk, and that's a picture of downtown. So edge to edge from this circle is about a 10-minute walk for the average pace. And then edge to center, so about Shoreline Park almost to the State Theater, is about a 5-minute walk along Water Street. If you zoom that in a little bit to a 2-minute walk, edge to edge, this circle is about 5 minutes, and then edge to center is about 2 minutes. So that's about Falcon Point Lofts to City Hall. If you look at that same circle on Sandusky Mall, that's about the parking lot to the middle of the mall. If you look at it at Meyer, it's about the edge of the parking lot to the center of the store. At Walmart, it's about the edge of the parking lot to the center of the store. At Target, it's about the edge of the parking lot to the center of the store. At Firelands Health, it's about the edge of the guest parking to the center of the hospital. And if you take a walk into Walmart and you go shopping, you're probably going to walk about 1/3 of a mile if you cover a large majority of the aisles from edge to edge in the store, even if you park close. Downtown, if you parked at the fire station on Market Street and you walked to Party at the Pier, it would take you about 5 minutes. And I can tell you, because we've been counting, nobody's parking over there to go to Party at the Pier. It's still pretty open. There's a lot of parking over there. If you park at the East Market lot over by Everwild, by BGSU, and walk to the State Theater for a show, it's going to take you about 5 minutes to walk there. And that's another bank of parking that's mostly open most of the time. The reason that I bring those two examples up is because there's a lot of vacant storefronts between that parking lot to the State Theater. So if people start parking over there, because that's where they can find a spot and we help lead them there, then they'll walk down and they're going to walk past our existing retail, they're going to walk past some vacant storefronts, and that's when those retail spaces become viable. That's when somebody gets the idea to put a shop in there because they notice people are walking past it, and people are walking past it, they're going to stop in and buy something. That's part of how parking and walking in downtown supports the retail system. Here's Washington Row to the State Theater. Washington Row is also a bank of parking that's very underutilized. Currently, it's about a 2-minute walk to the State Theater. And a lot of folks, I don't think, are really thinking about Washington Row as an available bank of parking when they're going into the downtown core. That's a 2-minute walk. That would support, if you have those parking spaces more utilized, that supports foot traffic along Washington Row and all down Columbus Avenue. So again, I show you that framework just to help understand why we chose what we did to study the parking. We're actually flying a drone over that entire map. Tom Horstman is our drone pilot in-house, and the drone is able to program every single spot. So we have the same photo over every block every time we're parking, or every time we're counting. So we'll be able to flip through those photos for all those dates. And then I am documenting via photograph the garage on every floor. So I'm going to be able to create a series of analyses and maps and graphics of what the utilization of the parking is, when it's the most used, when it's the least used, block by block, parking lot by parking lot, and that's what we're going to be working on. We're also working on other items in the plan, like a signage audit, where is our signage, and how do people find parking spaces today? And we'll be crafting some recommendations on some really easy things to change or implement to make the system better, and maybe some long-term goals to work on as part of this whole process. Thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you for the comprehensive update.
Absolutely.
Lots of food for thought there. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair.
I have a question.
Mark?
No, go ahead, Judy. I relinquish to you.
Aaron, you mentioned long-term parking. Is there any designated area for long-term or day-long parking?
Right now, we have a map online that if you go to like a downtown parking spot on the website, the Jackson Street parking lot is labeled for 24 hours, the garage is labeled for 48 hours, and there's some spaces in the parking, or the Paper District Marina that are labeled for multi-day. Also, down at the boat launch and Battery Park are labeled like long-term, though I don't expect that those are being used for that often.
Okay, so if someone's parked and they're there for 48 hours, are we enforcing that if they're not in that long-term parking area?
There's definitely room for improvement in parking enforcement, and that's something we're discussing too. How to implement a system that we're enforcing those, especially on-street parking more often.
Okay.
That's part of the conversation. Mhm.
I think Mark.
Yes.
And then David.
Okay, Aaron, thank you very much. Very comprehensive. Couple questions. I was involved with 2014, 2016 because that was done through Main Street with the Parker Frost Endowment helping on that. We did count 18 blocks, and the reason why we counted 18 blocks was for the core center of what we considered that time the entertainment district of Sandusky. We also are going to have expansion with Battery Park and other items. Is that being taken into account for your study at this time?
Battery Parks is kind of its own center of the universe, so that parking system will probably function on its own. That the number of parking spaces is plentiful in that site plan. So we're not considering what that future will do to this current system. We're really wanting to take a snapshot of how is everything working today. We do anticipate to take some counts next year because we're going to have changes on Columbus Avenue and understand how that system's changed. Or maybe even, I wonder if we wait until do the year after, because that's when people really find their new patterns. Once you make a transportation change, people take a minute to find their new patterns and their new habits.
You've also mentioned that in this study you've been looking at specific times. A lot of the times, we don't need to go back to it, but when I was looking at it was more the entertainment times rather than the normal function on a daily. You have people coming downtown, pay water bills, do stuff like that, maybe go to lunch, stuff like that. Are you looking to expand that?
So we did a few morning counts. So we have 3 morning counts and 3 noon counts, and then we have that one Saturday morning count with the farmers market. So that, I think, will give us a good picture. I can tell you that we have a lot of open parking spaces at those times from
Okay.
those counts.
Mr. Chair.
David?
Oh.
That's through you. In the present, I found the presentation helpful. I particularly like the graphics or maps for, I'm a visual person, and that helps. Several times in the presentation made reference to the intention of turning over spots, and I'll just refer to those as short-term. But I didn't really hear or understand what the goal or intention of how long those spots can be occupied before it becomes a problem. Is it like a 2-hour or a 4-hour, or what kind of time frame for those ones that you want to turn?
That's a good question. So there's lots of different philosophies out there as to what works, and I think what we'll need to do is tailor a system that works for us. There's cities that charge for parking past 10 minutes, that charge for every single time you park in a parking space. Right now, all of our parking is free, and we don't have a lot of mechanisms to look for that turnover. If you have 10 to 20% of your spaces open, it doesn't necessarily matter as much how long the next door neighbor cars are parked, as long as you've got that inventory. But part of making sure you have those openings is ensuring a turnover. And I don't think we know the answer to that yet of what that looks like in Sandusky. And if we're willing to implement, and what types of mechanisms we're willing to implement to force that turnover, which is either ticketing or paid systems. And I don't know that the community is interested in doing that. But what we do know is if we have a ton of data, we can show leadership what that looks like and where our pinch points are and where, people really are struggling to find space and how often. And that will help lead us down that road on that conversation to understand what works best for the city.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
Mike?
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of the data here is, mostly focused on, the here and now. I know you're considering the future. How are you going to cope? I'm kind of hoping that there's potential for hundreds of new residential spaces without on-site parking in the downtown area. So, 200, 300, 400, 500, we can hope for that need. How are we addressing that? Also, I'd like to know how you analyze private parking. There are a few lots that are private and could exclude everyone. Mostly they tend to be unofficially at least tolerate use by the public when during their non-core hours. So even if they have I think a couple things can happen. Some people get really strict and tow anything and want to threaten to tow anyone who parks there, and we have an ordinance to cover that notification. But others are more flexible, but how do you handle that when you're analyzing the data? And I'm going to hope you can give a brief answer to a three-phase question, because I also want to talk about how, people will walk a quarter mile, but I think it's better framed as they'll tolerate a quarter mile, and the tolerance of distance parking is highly variable. So having parking choices like a nearby pay parking versus will it be willing to walk is usually a good thing. I do, Midwesterners that are used to free parking everywhere it will not be a positive experience unless they get used to it, or it's really well motivated, but they won't come regularly for a quarter mile walk, I don't think. At least a certain percentage of your target market won't. So I'd be careful about saying that people will walk a quarter mile. Some people will.
Aaron?
Thank you.
Please.
Further questions?
I hope you got all those.
So first, how are we addressing the need for new parking and expanding the ability to create new residential opportunities downtown? That's certainly something that we know we'd love to see from an economic development, community development, and the functioning of our economy is to have more residents downtown. And as those spaces grow, then we'll need to take a look at that. This study is specifically looking at what is happening right now with our current population, our current events, and our current market. How are people using our parking inventory? It's a baseline snapshot of what's happening this year. Second, on private parking, so the way that we're counting is on-street spaces, public spaces, and private spaces. So we will have counts on private parking spaces, and there's definitely some opportunity there for owners of private parking lots to charge for parking during events, or potentially be in conversation with the city of would they allow public parking on their parking lot, or we are studying the inventory of private parking to see how that functions, and that could help us lead to conversations down the road of opportunities there. And finally, the quarter-mile walk, that is an in general statement. In general, people will walk about 5 minutes to go to a destination, but not always. And especially when they have mobility needs, they have speed, needs where they want to just run in and get a coffee or want to run in and pay a water bill, like we mentioned. And that's where that importance of the turnover comes in, where you have those 10 to 20% of spaces for folks that need to park right up close to where they're trying to get to and run in and run out.
I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention, intended to mention the need for more handicap parking. Some of our lots are, I don't know, maybe some of our lots are ADA compliant with the number and placement of the handicap spots, but I doubt it. And I'm more interested in observing what the need is and accommodating that than I am at strict adherence to the ADA standard.
We are also counting the handicap spaces separately, so we'll be able to produce statistics on how well those are used. There's a few I can say that are used a lot, but many of them are empty many of the time. So I think we have enough inventory, but that's something that we can look at with the results of the study as well.
Well, the only thing that matters is during events when they're most needed, and my observation is when traffic is heavy, the handicap spots are full first. When there's not much traffic, yeah, they sit empty, and it's annoying to see the best spots unused, right? But when there's an event, it's a problem.
Carl, go ahead.
I had two things real quick before we go back for second rounds with those who have already spoke. First, could the committee get access to a copy of your slideshow?
Absolutely.
That would be wonderful.
Attached to the minutes.
One of the things that, I've been working on downtown committees since 1985. I think Dr. Siemens has been on most of those off and on.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And I guess the thorn in the side of parking has always been employee/owners parking in front of their businesses. And I guess how have you seen and what ways to encourage those people to park in long-term parking rather than taking up prime spots? And what would be the strategy?
That's definitely part of the conversation is employee parking and where employees are parking. We don't have a good metric on that. And I don't think any owners are really tracking what their employees' cars, who's parking where. I know that there is messaging out there for business owners to ask their employees to please not park on the street and please park in the lot. Part of the system, I created a graphic for downtown parking spaces to show the hours of where the different lots are to hand out to business owners, and gave that to Destination Sandusky because they conduct merchant meetings. So that's one step, is just to make it visually really clear where the longer term parking is and hope for compliance. And you always start with that, right? You start with information and hope for compliance, and then if you're not getting it, then you start talking about what you might do to encourage better compliance, and we're not quite there yet. That might be a strategy.
And I was going to say compliance and enforcement probably is one thing that deals with that. And the last item I had is consideration for EV charging, especially long-term parking. Is that being considered?
This study is not really discussing EV, but we do have some grant writing going on in-house and some studies with Power Clean Future Ohio, which is a nonprofit organization that is leading information sharing with cities and analysis to help cities prepare for EV charging. From a planning perspective, I will recommend that when EV charging goes in, it goes in parking lots and garages and not on the street, because there's already so much competition with the curb, and we don't want to clutter up the curb. But I do think that that's an important thing in the future to be looking towards. And there is demand now. We know there's a gap from the analysis that's been done that has been shared by Power Clean Future Ohio. there are commuters and systems of EV drivers going from Toledo to Cleveland, for example, and there's a gap in our area. And some of those will be filled by private landowners, on major corridors. But there's certainly an opportunity to think about putting one or several in downtown, and we do have some grant writing going on for that.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
So I think you answered my question, but you're not anticipating putting parking meters right in the downtown daily parking area, is that correct?
Not at this time.
Okay, not at this time, okay.
It could be a future strategy. It just
Right.
depends on the community and leadership and how we decide how we want to manage our parking inventory.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Not that I see this question as particularly helpful, but curious, I like all the data points for the different dates and trying to line up holidays and different kind of events. Is there any kind of control for weather? I mean, if you're counting with drones, you don't even fly drones in the rain and heat and other weather-related factors, I think probably influence the data that we'll get. So is there like a key at the bottom that, but this was a rainy day, or this was an especially hot day, and then that kind of leads to, well, presumably our great parking demand is in the summertime and during these big public event type situations, but point of curiosity about the off-season and when there's snow removal and where snow is stacked, and I mean, Columbus Avenue, in the big storms, we used to pile it in the middle of the street. We won't be doing that anymore. So snow removal and stuff will also be a consideration in parking studies eventually. I just wondered if we're thinking about that or we're only doing the summer months.
We really wanted to, the highest goal is like, when is this really busy? What we're hearing from people is there's no parking downtown. So let's understand that question and when, where that's true and when that's true. But we do have a few counts in April and May, early May, to understand that more baseline. I think the April counts happened before any of the boaters got here. Some of the boaters get here in May, but really the season doesn't pick up until Memorial Day. So we have some of that baseline. We're not currently planning to count during winter. If we have one or two snow events, those are really isolated events. And if we get the weather like Tennessee, that all the climate predictors are saying we're going to get fewer and fewer of those events. But that's certainly something we can look at if leadership and folks really want to see what that looks like. We cannot fly the drone under bad weather, so it can't be too windy and it can't be rainy. So we're not able to count unless it's fairly clear weather. And if there's any anomalies where like this day looks really different than other days, we might try to explain that, and maybe it was 95 degrees that day. So we'll do some exploring once we see what those outliers look like, if there's things that don't follow the pattern, to help us explain why.
Okay, thank you. Art?
A couple questions. Actually, you got a few of mine, so that's good.
Great minds think alike.
Originally, when we heard this, it was about a committee being formed. Is this purely a staff committee, or are there people outside of staff that are on this committee for doing the parking study?
We have not formed a committee. There is a group of stakeholders that I've reached out to and met with a couple times, including some business owners and downtown residents, to ask them questions and get some feedback from those stakeholders. It's not any kind of formalized committee with any decision-making power, or they're not going to be forming any kind of recommendations or have any consensus amongst themselves. It's just we gathered some folks to ask them questions about their perception of parking.
So how many are currently working on this?
It's mostly me and Tom Horseman.
Okay.
It's internal. It's staff-led.
You've also made references to urban studies that you probably are using to look at what normal walking distances would be and so forth. Can you share any of those with us that you've been using?
So some sources from the typical.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. We can find some.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mike?
I am pleased that we are doing this internally. It's not the only way to do it. We spent a good chunk of change years ago on a parking study. I'm sure it was well worth it, but, it's conditions have changed, so building on that, or I'm sure you're referring to the prior parking study as a baseline anyway. I'm sure it had some useful data. So yeah, kudos to the staff for putting in the work and saving us some change and maybe getting a perspective that's close to home.
Good. Any other questions for Aaron?
One that I almost forgot was, this is a flexible study, of course, because when you look at Columbus Avenue streetscape, we're going to have some negative impact on parking. Is that being taken into account with the study?
So we're counting what's happening right now. We do intend to do more counts after the change is made on Columbus Avenue, so we understand how those patterns shift.
Good, thank you.
Just one more, Mr. Chairman. We've done some repaving, and one of the best things that happens is when we've got some wide spots on, I think especially on Water Street, on East Water, if you get out there, very wide, very fast-moving traffic, and when you just put the diagonal spots, even though they hardly ever get used, number one, they bring order to parking during an event when it's needed. Number two, it narrows the perceived lane width and calms traffic a bit. So anything we can do to delineate parking spots, even if we don't, just with striping. I know it's not cheap, I know paint's not free, but those little things do help. And it's noted and appreciated.
All right. Any other questions? Good discussion. Thank you again for the study and the comprehensive report. All right, old business. No updates since last meeting. Everyone has the list on the agenda. Are there any questions on any of those projects that anyone has in general? Judy?
On the Columbus Avenue project, has any thought been given to permanent restroom facilities down there?
Are you talking about at Washington Park?
Yes.
There was not any inclusion of restrooms as part of the Columbus Avenue project, so that wasn't part of the scope or conversation as part of that project.
Okay.
Other questions? David?
Well, I'm just following up on that point, and I appreciate that you missed the last meeting, and the minutes frankly reminded me of, Judy brought it up 2 meetings ago, and at the time it was like asking for consideration and change order, or with the potential for existing infrastructure from long demolished restrooms up in Washington Park. And at that time, I kind of got the inference that, yeah, we'll look into it. And now this answer kind of is disillusioningly fallen flat.
I have a note from Colleen from last meeting asking about restrooms. I mean, that's something that is on the radar of recreation because they manage our parks. So it's been noted as a request, is my understanding. I don't believe that, I'm not aware of older water infrastructure that connected to restrooms in Washington Park, so I can look into that, but I wouldn't expect that those would be in the footprint of what the construction zone is going to be for the Columbus Avenue project. But that is something I can look into. That was not on my radar, that there's potentially.
Well, and beyond that, the contingency money of this project or whatever to look for an opportunity to finance this, be it a change order or not. And I also, I've only been around town since the middle 80s, and I don't remember when the fountain by the courthouse was what is now sort of
The sunken garden.
Yeah, the sunken garden. I was intrigued when I heard that had formerly existed, but that's pretty close to the boundary of this project, and I think, could be a little scope bleed if there's money if we're spending a whole lot of money for this project, maybe this is the best time to look at the inclusion something else before we dig up the streets and reconfigure the parking in that block and all that.
The block between Washington Street and Adams is not part of the construction project. That's been fully designed, but it was not funded in the construction project. So that area will be almost untouched. There's electric that has to be run down to near the Boy in the Boot, but so that'll only be a trench to run that new electricity. But the area where that sunken garden is not in the construction project that's currently scheduled.
Not to belabor, but I would believe any infrastructure that was at the old restrooms is unusable at this point due to, lack of use and time.
Yeah,
So
and certainly-
I don't want to belabor it, and don't want to get into debate, but I'm just throwing that out as a comment. Judy, you have a question?
So are you saying that the plan only goes to Washington Row or Washington Street?
Washington Street
Doesn't go all the way to Adams?
The construction project does not go all the way to Adams at this time. We have the Washington Street to Adams fully designed. If commission and staff find funding for that piece for a future construction project, but it is not part of the construction that will be occurring this year.
I was under the impression it was all the way to Adams. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mark?
I agree with you, Judy, on that, because I think there was a project that we were going to eliminate and go to angle parking on the east side between Washington and Adams.
Correct, that's what's in the design.
So it was included in the design?
Yes, the
Okay.
design project went all the way to Adams Street.
Okay.
So that's ready, it's fully ready with construction documentation if the funding gets
Okay,
there.
thank you.
All right.
And when do you anticipate this starting, the Close Avenue project?
Right now, it's after Labor Day, but we'll have more detailed schedules soon. Josh Snyder is leading that project now, the construction process, so I rely on them for the information from this point forward.
Do you know which side of the street they're starting on?
On the west, that's where the water line is. So the
Okay.
water line, the replacement is the first major thing to happen in the
Okay,
construction
thank you.
process.
Are they looking at sewer replacement?
Sewer is much lower, it's not part of the project. It will be undisturbed.
Okay, but it's an old sewer line is what I'm getting at. Fair enough, thank you.
All right. Any other of the projects that anyone has a question about?
Just
Bill?
from the minutes, did we find out anything about emergency vehicle access on Washington Row with the change in parking? We were discussing width of emergency vehicles on,
They did a
Access.
follow-up email
Oh, I
that
missed that,
indicated that
okay.
it,
Sorry.
that it complied.
it's all good, okay.
Right.
And the hotel project, is that moved along at all?
There is a new memorandum of understanding that City Commission authorized signing. That was a 6-month extension with the original development team. I don't have the talking points on the top of my head from that, but that.
I believe it's sometime in October it's either go or no go.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds right.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Poole, you have any comments?
West Pool, 1939 East Oldgate. You guys talked about a lot of stuff. It gets confusing as you go through. Regarding parking, dealing mostly about just the philosophy. The concept, would just ask yourselves, how many times have you ever, or do you know of folks that would have walked from Battery Park to, say, Landmark?
To where?
To Landmark, to eat. I mean, that kind of distance. Envision that distance for walking.
I see.
Just give
Just
an
as an answer to your question, as a
Okay.
member of the yacht club, I see people walking from both the yacht club and Battery Park Marinas downtown on a regular basis.
I
So,
walk-
It's
I walk-
not an issue.
I walk downtown every day, all around downtown. That's not the concept. The concept is a philosophy that says business operates best. People make their decisions about getting up from their chair to go someplace and they decide where they're going to go at home. They decide whether or not it's convenient and what place they select to go to. It doesn't start when you get downtown, oh, let's look for parking, is all I'm trying to say. It's about your philosophy, what you're looking at. You have to provide an environment that when a person says, let's go to dinner, they have in their head where they want to go. That's a nice place, but I can get a steak anywhere in town. And I would ask you how many folks, when we're competing with 250 and restaurants as far as away as Crocker Park, because I've gone there to eat, where you're going to park is integral to the conversation, to that decision that person makes. And you have a policy here, a philosophy here, that doesn't give that as much, what I say, emphasis as I think that it should. Okay, so what it amounts to is we have a good, we don't have a shortage of parking today because we don't have enough customers. There's not enough guests. You need to come down here after the Friday night busy hour from 5:30 to 7:30 and recognize that the businesses that are, the restaurants and so forth, are open till they have to close because there's no business. When businesses are closing at 9 instead of 10:30, it's or the bars close at midnight instead of 1, it's because they lack business. And so don't be fooled into thinking that just because when you go down there the 2 times a week or whatever it is that you're not unhappy with the parking. That's not what the point is. The city's supposed to be trying to grow the businesses down here, and that's what I'm talking about. Just a matter of philosophy, what you look at. With regards to, I'm going to look at the counts after we do the downtown project. You have a lot of empty spaces, and if you're not planning right now for, say, 200 more people living in the upstairs development of these empty buildings, and the number of employees and customers you like to bring into the businesses that are the empty storefronts, and you've got no idea, and you think they're going to park at Battery Park, or what you call 5 minutes away. That I don't argue the distance, but just recognize that, folks, when's the last time you were a block and a half away from the bank? Just your own experience. So what I'm talking about is everything she said is accurate. It just doesn't necessarily apply here. People's decisions about parking and where they're willing to spend their money differ based on what it is. I'll pay $50 to park to watch LeBron James, not to go to the barbershop. So if you're not going to be thinking about what your business is down here, each individual ones, like drive-up parking for the pizza place, something that folks weren't real happy we did, but, well, those are kinds of things. Just something to think about. And reference when waiting for the Columbus Ave project before you can determine what's going to happen. It's not complicated. 44 spaces are going to disappear on Columbus Avenue at any given moment in time. You can decide those 44 spaces will go to the closest 44 spaces around. You don't have to wait. You can look at the data you have now. If you know where the space is available at any given moment in time, you know where all the cars are going to go that you're displacing. It's not that complicated. And if you wait until after you've made the decision and made all the changes and you're stuck with it, you will impact whether or not your businesses grow.
Okay.
Very true.
All right. Any other items to bring forth? Judy?
One other question on the previous thing. What is the update on the pathway from the landing to Cleveland Road or Cedar Point Drive?
Yes, so that section of pathway is on hold until the Metro Parks and ODOT can finalize an agreement for acquisition. Metro Parks has property outside the city, but that grant funding that ODOT received for that project required that the environmental and right-of-way be tied together for all of the entire length of the project, which is from Cedar Point Drive all the way to, BGSU Firelands. So all the right-of-way that is being sought for the project is holding up our portion of the project, which, when it comes to construction, will actually be a separate project from what they're doing outside the city.
So you have no timeline on when that might happen?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Other items? Okay, good meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Aaron, again, thank you. Very comprehensive.